Shooter ready. Stand by. Saddle up for gunfighter life. Veteran owned. Warfighter approved. Gluten free. Sustainably harvested. Renewable. All the buzzwords, right? No, but to be serious, welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. So, if you're a tactical junkie out there, like you just care about black rifles and Glock 19s and you got pick rail on your pick rail, man. If you're that kind of guy and you don't care about expanding the horizons, that's okay. But this episode is probably not for you. Because not a lot of these rifles, if any, are going to be really tactical rifles. Not that you couldn't use them in a tactical application, but many of them are very practical rifles. Today's episode, as you might have gleaned, is about rifles that are no longer being made, that are really good rifles. And that's at the time of this recording in the year of our Lord 2023, the 3rd day of December. That may change. Maybe some of these guns will come back. But just really, really good guns that have gone the way of the dodo bird. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, saddle up. No intro today because really not germane to today's topic. Although you might imagine I've got some experience with these that I may talk about when we get on individual basis with these individual rifles. But let's talk about gone but not forgotten, at least not by me. The first one I am going to talk about, as you might know if you're a regular listener, I grew up a poor boy in the South. We didn't take fancy vacations, and oftentimes my uncle would take me hunting because my father was busy working. But every once in a while we'd go on a big long hunt, which I still obviously remember it, and it was still impactful to me. Well, my first gun was a hand-me-down from a different uncle, a bolt-action 410, which I did a lot of hunting with. But when it came for my first bear hunt, I didn't have a rifle. I didn't own a rifle. And we didn't have a spare rifle. Again, we working class, like poor, right? And so I borrowed my best friend's father's rifle. And I didn't know it at the time because it was the rifle I could get my hands on. But it was a great rifle and kind of legendary in pockets of America. What is that rifle? That is a Marlin 336, but not in 30-30, but in 35 Remington. And I really like the 35 Remington. I did an episode way back on the 35 Remington, one of the all-time, I think, best on YouTube. A lot of the more obscure cartridge ones do well on YouTube. I'm not sure why. But on the 35 Remington, Black Bear Slayer. And it's kind of what it's known for. It's known as a Great Woods cartridge, the 35 Remington. Some would argue that the 30-30 is a better cartridge, and I'm not here to argue better or worse, but the 35 is a legendary. It's got more frontal diameter, it's got heavier bullet weight, and I know on paper and in as far as physics, force equals mass times velocity squared. So when you bump up the velocity, you kind of get at least more energy foot-pounds, but that doesn't always equate to more actual real-world effectiveness on game, in my opinion, and many others. The 35 Remington is kind of known for punching above what it shows on paper. It's a big, heavy bullet at moderate velocities. It does well. It does well in that. It's just a classic Remington, and I'm not married to the Remington low, but it's kind of a classic. It goes, I think, hand in hand with that Marlin 336 and 35 Remington. Just that Remington core lock load. And you don't need a lot of different loads because that load works really well. It works well out of that rifle. Those old Marlin 336s and 35 Remington, micro groove rifling, or even prior to that, they're just a great gun. and kind of people that really know about them and have used them, or maybe had an old timer that used them, they really like that gun. It has quite the following, and it's no longer being made. Now Marlin has come back, and thankfully they were bought by Ruger, and I think from all accounts in the guns that I've seen and handled, they're made really well. They don't sadly make the 35 Remington, and I don't think they ever did make it in stainless. They made the 336 3030 in stainless. I really hope that they come back out with the 336 and 35 Remington in stainless. But that is just a great rifle that is just no longer with us. And that's kind of the theme of today's show, and I thought it was a good place to start. The next one is Remington. Remington 760. And I'm not going to pick a specific cartridge for all of these. The Remington 760 is most commonly in 30-06. They made a normal length version with a 20-something inch barrel, and they made a shorter version, like a carbine version. But both of these, what makes them unique is they're a pump action. They're a pump action rifle, which is not that unique, but a pump action rifle in a full powered modern rifle cartridge, like 30-06, 308, 243. And what I think is a great pairing for this rifle, the 280 Remington. Kind of doomed, I think, by bad marketing, because it's a fantastic round. But both have kind of fallen into obscurity. But they're both just really good at what they do. A good, practical, stalking rifle. The Remington 760. You're not giving up anything as far as modern cartridges. They're, by all accounts, a very good, accurate rifle. In fact, my uncle, when we were growing up, he had a rifle. My uncle, Uncle Will, he took me hunting, I think, more than my father did. Now, often I went hunting on my own. I just went on my own, but he took me hunting. He took me hunting a lot, and he didn't have to, right? He's my uncle, but he took it upon himself to take me hunting. And I don't think he realizes how thankful I am to God for those experiences, and thankful that he took me on those experiences. Anyway, his hunting rifle, the only one I ever remember him hunting with, was a Remington 760. Now his was an .06, but I think a good pairing for this, for the things that I would do with that rifle, the kind of hunting that I still like to do, spot and stalk and still hunting, 280 is, I'd probably, if I was getting one, I might get one in 30-06 just because that round is so much easier to acquire. But if you talk about from a pure ballistic standpoint, a pump action, fast handling, fast shooting 760 in 280 Remington, yeah, that's a fantastic rifle. And they're not really coveted. They're just such a good rifle. I think that they're still a great bargain. They're not as cheap as they used to be, but I think they're a lot cheaper than they should be. So if you're looking for a bargain on this list, and if you're into, let's say, classic kind of hunting, like you're going to put on your Jones hat, roll up your sleeves, get out there and do some spot and stalk and still hunting, maybe some tracking, inside of 400 yards, and you might take jump shots. It's a fantastic rifle. So that's just kind of a great rifle in general. Now, a lot of these are Remingtons, and sadly the Remington that I'm talking about that made these rifles no longer exists, right? The Remington brand name exists, but it's been bought and sold so many times, and when Remington started making guns again recently, I went out and bought one, and I was just very, very disappointed. And from what I've seen, other ones that I didn't buy that I've handled in the store, hoping that they would come back strong with their flagship guns. I was just kind of wanted to. I was just let me be polite and say I was lackluster when it came to their new production guns. But some of these old Remingtons just harken back to where American gun companies made good American guns in America by Americans. Did I mention America? Right, one of those guns, the Remington bolt action, and not the 700. The Remington Model 7. 7. No zeros. No aughts. The Remington Model 7. A short, handy, light rifle. Great for mountain hunting. Great for, if you wanted to build it into a scout rifle. Anything you would want a light, handy rifle for, where you're carrying a rifle long distances on foot. And in fact, I prefer it to a 700 for most applications, right? If I'm trying to build a designated marksman rifle, no, I want the 700. Actually, I don't want the 700, but if I was picking between the two, that's better. For a sniper rifle, for the U.S. military, the 700 is better than the 7. But for most practical, again, what I would consider classic practical hunting, the 7 is phenomenal. For a mountain rifle, beautiful, superb. It's everything that I want without all the extra that I don't want in most 700s. So that Remington Model 7, maybe they'll start making that again. The last SHOT Show I attended pre-COVID, they were still making them. And they had some beautiful examples. And they even, I think you could get from their custom shop for a time, the Model 7 and a Mannlicher style stock, meaning the stock extended all the way to the end of the barrel. And I just think those guns are some of the most beautiful style rifles ever created by humans. So, just that Remington Model 7 is awesome. The next one I'm going to talk about is like it, but I think the Remington Model 7 shines as an example of a great mountain rifle. Not that you can't use it for other applications, right? But this next one, as far as like a woods carbine, a swamp gun, a canoe hunting gun, something like that, or building it into a scout rifle. And that is the Remington. I'm going to use the cool name, the Mohawk. And I think maybe they named it Mohawk because it has a vent rib like a shotgun. Maybe that you consider that a Mohawk. Maybe that has nothing to do with why they named it that. But the Remington Mohawk, 600, 660, these are just awesome guns. And from what I understand, and I'm not a Jeff Cooper aficionado, right? I appreciate Jeff Cooper as a former Marine myself. I appreciate and much of the things we have today in modern shooting have been passed down or come from, and if not a genesis, at least a refinement of ideas by Jeff Cooper, like the generally accepted firearm safety rules. But I believe his first thing, his first scout rifle was a Remington either 600 or 660, which tells you he probably thought of it as a good practical rifle. And these are some of the in days of yore when I managed gun stores, and one of these would come in, and I was like, they're really cool, but and I just didn't get one. Part of me wishes back then when they were easier to come by, I had just bought one. They came in some really cool cartridges. Probably the most practical is no surprise, the 308, but they also came in the 350 Remington Magnum. If you want a short, light, handy, swamp carbine, canoe hunting carbine for bigger critters like moose, like elk, things like that. And I really love hunting out of a canoe. Talk about just a really cool rifle for that. That's no longer with us. The Remington 600s and 660s. The Mohawk. Just a cool rifle with a cool name. So, and a cool cartridge. I don't know if they ever chambered a 350 Remington in something else they may have, but I think it pairs well if you want a thumper, if you want a dragoon, swamp carbine. If that's a thing. They should be, right? Because there are some big swamp bucks out there. But just a cool rifle. I may come back to Remington because they made a lot of good guns back in the day. But let's switch over to another R. Legendary in American rifles. Ruger. Ruger is one of my favorite American gun manufacturers. I don't take sponsors on the show. I don't want to take bribes. But obviously with my training and experience, at least for like blue-collar working man guns, it's hard to beat Ruger, especially in the last couple of decades. I mean, it really, not just in rifles, but in many things, Ruger is, I think, well known and deservingly accredited with making good, reliable, guns at a price point that the average American looks at and goes, yeah, that's a good value. And I would agree. But some of these rifles, they don't make anymore. Maybe some of that reason is because they cost more to make and they can't make them at that price point. Or perhaps it's because the American consumer is just driven by the latest, greatest. I need a super high BC round and I need a super long range gun, even though I generally don't shoot anything past 100 yards. But I'm going to drop that like it's hot. Let's get back to Ruger and some of these rifles I wish they made. Now, before I joined the Marine Corps, I know this is just way off in left field, but it'll come in for a landing here soon. Before I joined the Marine Corps, one of my first serious jobs where I made any kind of serious money, not like digging holes or cutting grass or things like that, was being a lifeguard. This was before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did a couple of seasons as a lifeguard. A great job, I think, for a young man that likes to be outside and stuff like that. But anyway, I was a ballistics nerd even back then. This was not pre-internet days. The internet existed, but it was way before cell phones and smartphones. And I would sit there and study ballistics tables. When like the weather was bad and nobody was swimming, it was a rainy day. To tell you what kind of a ballistics nerd I was even back then. Well, this is what taught me one of these lessons. Don't buy something based on what's on paper. I studied these ballistics charts and everything, and I came to the conclusion of a young teenage boy that I needed to save up my money and buy a Ruger all-weather, chambered in 7mm Remington Magnum. Right? And that would be one thing if I lived in Wyoming. I lived on the eastern shore of the Delmarva Peninsula, the southeast United States. Right? I needed a Remington 7mm Magnum cartridge chambering like a brand new driver needs a Ferrari. And I think I was probably already a gold medalist in rifle at this point. I started competing pretty young. When I won my first gold medal and when I bought this rifle was a little bit fuzzy, but I wasn't a big, especially since I was a wrestler and I was probably dieting most of the time for that. I wasn't a big kid. I needed a 7 mag. That was not a good choice, right? I did not need that. I needed that again, like a young driver needs a Ferrari or a Porsche. But what was a really good choice was that Remington 77 all-weather. Canoe paddle stock. Some people think they are hideous. I think they are utilitarian chic, if I can, maybe that's a term. Maybe I just made it up. It is utilitarian chic. It is functional. It's got sling swivels, or it's got sling attachments built in, better than sling swivel studs. It's very utilitarian, very rugged. That was a good choice. Why? Why can we not get that back? Now, they still make the Hawkeye, which is kind of the development of that old 77. But why not? I know a lot of people like that canoe paddle. I can't imagine, even if it's not Zytel, even if it's a more modern polymer, I can't imagine it will be that hard to come back out with that canoe paddle stock. Why? I mean, even if it's not for a price point, can we have like Ruger Deluxe? Can you have like a Ruger Deluxe line? Because coming out with a new all-weather in a cartridge, in many cartridges, but with that Zytel canoe paddle stock with the sling attachment points on there, just rugged working man's hunting rifle for all kinds of weather conditions. And Ruger's kind of known, I think, for making a bunch of different models in stainless steel. Can we get that with the canoe paddle stock? And can we get it with the canoe paddle stock with wood inlays if you want it? Like maybe sell them aftermarket to make some more money, but have like walnut inlays, mahogany inlays, spalted maple inlays, whatever. Again, Ruger Deluxe. But those old Zytel all-weather canoe paddle stocks are just, in my opinion, awesome. Can we get those back? Anyway, Ruger made some other cool guns. They made those all-weathers in a smaller version. They made a really cool one. I believe that came, I don't remember if it came with iron sights or not. I hope that it did. But they made it in 7.62 by 39. A little handy bolt action in 7.62 by 39. Now, I'm not advising you go hunt deer with some just bargain basement Tula FMJ or Tula Hollow Point for that matter ammo. But the 7.62 by 39 can absolutely be a great medium game cartridge and a great crossover tactical practical cartridge. Having a short, light, handy, bolt action, controlled round feed carbine with stainless steel and one of those really rugged stocks. Talk about a practical rifle at reasonable ranges, especially on the East Coast, east of the Mississippi. That's legit. That's a great, great option. So coming back out with that one as well. Now, they still make the 77-44, which is a bolt action 44 Magnum. I got to imagine it wouldn't be that hard. I'm not an engineer, but to come back out with that in 7.62 by 39. Anyway, that's a rifle I wish was still with us. And since we are on the 7.62 by 39, let's jump over. Let's keep that cartridge. Let's talk about the SKS. I've done a whole episode on the SKS, a phenomenal rifle. Going back to my younger days, I didn't have one, but my best friend did, and many people. I think it was probably one of the most common hunting rifles growing up. Not because it was the best hunting rifle, but because for poor Southerners, it was a easily attainable, really affordable. I forget, I don't want to make up numbers, but they were really, really cheap. And I think because they were so cheap for so long, people think that they're a cheap rifle. They're not a cheaply made rifle. We just kind of scored as the American public when the Cold War ended because there was a ton of these rifles and supply and demand drove the price down. But they're phenomenal rifles. And unlike there are many AK variants you can get made new, I don't even know what it would cost to get a good, modern, tooled, well-made SKS. I got to imagine it would be really expensive because, again, they're not a cheap rifle. Just because we got them cheaply doesn't mean they were cheap to make. If you get something at 90% off, that doesn't mean that that's what it costs to make it. It just means that you got a good deal. So the SKS definitely belongs on this list for a rifle that's no longer with us. You know, gone but not forgotten. They're a phenomenal rifle. I don't know if anybody would buy a new manufactured one because I gotta suspect that it would be a pretty expensive rifle. But if you could, like, modernize it, you know, make it with a good modern mounting system, you know, 1913 rail on it in a good place, you know, M-lock attachments on the stock, adjustable length of pull, things like that. And I'm not talking about getting a classic one and Tapcoing it out. I'm talking about a really well-made version of that. The SKS is a phenomenal rifle. But that's definitely a rifle that's gone but not forgotten. I mean, it's not gone. There's still plenty of them around, but I mean gone as far as not being made anymore. All right, let's go back to Ruger. And then maybe we'll go back to Remington. We'll go in a little circle here. Did you know that Ruger made lever actions? Picture kind of what a 1022 looks like, but with a lever on the bottom instead of semi-auto. I know this because I mentioned I was a nerd when I was a kid, and I would often, this is like pre-common affordable internet days, I would often sit in my father's house and look at the stack of gun magazines that he would get. And he would often get the Ruger catalog, back when you got catalogs. And in that catalog, there were I forget what year it was, it's probably the 90s, sometime in the 90s, there were these Ruger lever action rifles. I believe they came in 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, and 44 Magnum. Awesome. They may have come in other calibers, but I remember those. So, not that Americans ever gave up loving lever action rifles, but I think that there's a little bit of a resurgence in the love Americans have for lever action rifles. With that resurgence, why not? Is there any good reason why they couldn't come back out with that lever action? And I'm a fan of stainless steel. Come out with it in lever action stainless steel. Come out with it, yes please, in 44 Magnum. But also, why not come out with it in 357 Magnum? If you don't know, it also took the rotary magazines, much like the 1022, which is great because it feeds rounds with a rim fairly reliably. So why not come out with it in 44 Magnum and 357 Magnum? A little lever action, quick handling, with iron sights, but with the ability to mount a scope. 357 Magnum like that would just be awesome. If you don't know, if you can't picture it, you'd have to look up the picture of one, because they don't look like most classic lever actions. They look like a more modern, sleek design. And not that there's anything wrong with a classic lever action, but you're not dealing with the tube magazine. You're dealing with a box-fed magazine, which I think would be appealing to some people, not the purists, not the classic people, but the people that like lever action but want some other features. Anyway, the Ruger lever actions, a brief experiment on their part, I think, but maybe it would do better now than it did when they introduced it. Maybe it was just the wrong time. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about and they would tank. But I still think they're cool. Now, let's go back to Remington. Remington. How I longed for the days of really good, high-quality manufactured Remington rifles. Remington made a lot of variations of the 700. Perhaps they're probably by far the most popular rifle they ever made was the 700 series. Well, they made one, and I owned one. Sadly, one of the guns I sold. And I've sold many guns. I don't regret selling most guns, but I regret selling this one. Remington 700 VTR. I think VTR stood for Varmint Tactical Rifle, which seems like a weird pairing, but it was a good concept. And the rifle that I had was I know tack driver gets thrown around, but this thing was crazy accurate. And I know nowadays it's like, one MOA. This thing was what I'm going to call hyper accurate. Before that was common. And just a great gun. And it did it without weighing a ton. Back even in the 90s and stuff, you could get these really accurate guns if you wanted a really heavy bull barrel and a bunch of custom work. But this one came off the line, and it was super accurate. I took my first pronghorn with it. Not only was it accurate, and I don't want to throw out numbers because I honestly don't remember, and this is I think, digital photos being common days. I don't have any pictures, but took my first pronghorn with it, and I remember it being crazy accurate with just cheap Remington green and white box, I think UMC 308. It was crazy accurate with that. Who knows what it would have done with like a really high-end custom or semi-custom load today, like a Hornady custom loading. It was just a thing of beauty. And what makes it kind of unique are a couple things that made it unique. It had 2 sling swivel attachments in the front instead of 1, which I like if you're going to run a sling and a bipod, or if you're going to run a Ching sling or something like that. Also, what I think was the most distinguishing factor, it had a triangle barrel, which might be hard to picture. But picture you take a normal bull barrel and you cut it like a triangle. And the idea behind this, and I think it worked, was that you got more surface area. Now that's kind of the whole point of fluting a barrel, is getting more surface area so that the barrel does not heat up in strings of fire quite as much, and it cools down faster between like a long series of shots. And I think it worked. I think it got shunned because some people thought it was ugly. But I think it was very practical. And also, since it was a triangle, on the front of that triangle, they cut in ports, which I also thought was very practical. I just think it was a superb design and a great gun, that VTR. They made it in other calibers. They made it in 308. I believe they made it in 243. Mine was an olive drab stock. It was just a really good gun. And again, one of the ones I regret selling. I don't know if they're all as accurate as mine was, but again, that was just a superbly accurate gun before that was a common thing, right? Before you could just go buy a budget Savage Axis and have it be a tack driver. It was a really good gun, and I think a really good concept. And I think most people shunned it because they kind of scratched their head on that triangle barrel. But I think it made a lot of sense, and I think it was a good gun. And I certainly haven't forgotten about it. Now I want to leave off with a Winchester, because we haven't talked about Winchester. I think mostly because a lot of the legendary Winchester rifles, they still make, right? They still make the Model 94, 1894 in 30-30. They still make the 1892. They still make a lot of their great lever guns. They even still make, last I checked, the 1895 in like 30-06 and 405 Winchester. They still make those. And they still make the Winchester Model 70. Now, they made that for a long time, which I would say was a Model 70 in name only, because they went to a push feed, which I don't know how that could be the same model as the old classic controlled round feed, kind of legendary rifleman's rifle, but they still made it. And they, I think, make an even better one today than ones they made for decades. They make a really good one today. Now, one of the ones that they don't make that I think is a really cool rifle. Did you know that Winchester made a semi-automatic 308? Yeah, and this is not a battle rifle, right? If you're looking for a battle rifle, then look to a SCAR 17, look to, one of your AR-10s. If you're looking for a full powered rifle cartridge fighting rifle, go even with an M1A. But if you want a sleek, handy semi-auto Woods carbine, these are just gorgeous. They're sleek, they're handy, they look like, they just look like a classic hunting rifle. They're very minimalist looking. However, they're a semi-automatic 308. And although you may not be, doing fast mag swaps and tack reloads while going in an urban prone, that's not what this rifle was designed for. If you needed 1 or 2 or 3 rounds, doing a deer drive in 308, I think these would be a superb, fast-handling, light-handy rifle. Now, these, I know about them, but I don't know that I've ever actually even handled one, because I don't think they were super popular. But looking at them, unless there is some glaring problem I'm not aware of, they seem like a really good idea. A fast-handling, quick, handy, semi-auto 308 hunting-style carbine. So, anyway, I figured I would leave off with that one. Now, some housekeeping stuff. Hey, gunfighters, just a quick insert. There's some new merch at the store, GoodShepherdTraining.com. The sports hoodie that's in the thumbnail, if you're looking on Spotify, that's available. If you're on Apple, I apologize for that really old thumbnail that I took in my old office. I've tried to reach out to Apple, tried to get them to change it, but alas, it's still there. Spotify lets you change different images for each episode. But if you're listening on Apple, which is another big one, there is a pretty cool OD green shaded hoodie that says on the back Roots, and it has crossed rifles, an M16 and an M14. And on the front, it has an old front stuffer, an old musket, and it says, "A rifleman like my fathers before me." Anyway, if that intrigues you, there's a link in the show notes if you care to look at that more deeply. Also, don't forget to become a patron. Patrons get some pretty cool insider content. Stuff like guns for Bigfoot. Just super practical, really useful stuff like that. But no, we have a good time over there on Patreon. So if you want some more content, or if you want me to talk about things I don't normally talk about on the show for whatever reason, for the general public, you might want to check out Patreon. But mostly, if you just want to support the show and think, hey, the value I get out of this podcast every month is worth, a fraction of the cost of a box of ammo. Do you think that's true? If you think that's true, I would appreciate your support on Patreon. Just being real with you. This is my job. I work to serve you guys. This podcast is not mostly for me. I do it to serve you guys. But in order for it to be a thing, it has to be profitable. So, yay capitalism. So if you find value in this podcast, consider becoming a patron. Hopefully you get more out of Patreon than you pay into it, even there, but mostly because you appreciate the podcast and the content. Again, consider becoming a patron. They get some pretty cool insider content there. All right, with that, the tactical tip of the day. Slings. On most rifles, I think you want a sling. but not just for a thing to hold the rifle on your shoulder. That's a good, useful thing for a sling, but I think sadly, the art of being a practical rifleman, which is one of the reasons I went out and did all the work on the practical rifleman training for the modern day, I think the art of shooting with a sling is a dying art, sadly. So let's bring that back here in America, where we have a rich heritage of being good practical riflemen. The tactical tip is learn to shoot with sling tension, right? Learn how to shoot prone, kneeling, sitting, standing offhand with sling tension, aiding you in your shooting ability. You can do it with a classic 2-point sling. You can do it the way I used to do it back in the early rifle competition days with the old military loop sling. You can do it with the more modern military web sling, like we did shooting rifle quals in the U.S. Marine Corps. You can do it with a Ching sling. You can do it with a Rhodesian sling. You can do it with a modern Magpul sling, which, thanks to a guy named Steve Clifford, he has his own YouTube channel. I appreciate him. You can do the same thing like you would do with an old military loop sling with a more modern Magpul sling. And I've been trying that out, right? Hopefully I don't stagnate in my shooting and training ability. So learn to shoot with sling tension, right? And the best way to do that is the best way to train most things in shooting: dry fire. Dry fire. Use the sling for sling tension to improve your shooting positions. Practical shooting positions like kneeling, prone, standing, not off a bench. Learn to shoot with that sling tension. With whatever kind of sling that you want to run. Maybe you realize that sling's not the best for that setup. But most slings, you can improve your shooting ability. Your, let's say, acceptable movement of that reticle or that front sight with the proper use of a sling. Learn that. That's your tactical tip of the day. Don't let that art die out in the next generation. Your tactical verse of the day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So what Jesus said, the first of all the commandments, and the second like it, you should probably know those, right? Love God with everything you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. And obviously there's a lot that goes into that. Those are two overarching commands that many other commands fit into. Like love your neighbor as yourself. Don't steal from him. Don't commit adultery with his wife. Love God with everything you have. Don't take his name in vain. Don't make a graven image. Don't have idolatry in your life. That's not loving God with everything you have. That's loving something else in place of God. Anyway, remember those. If Jesus says the first and second, you probably should know those. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.